Where are we? Who are you?
I'm Susanna George. I'm a correspondent on the international desk. And we are in the lobby of the St. Regis Hotel in Washington, D.C. We just went through security, had all of our bags checked and wanded down, and we're kind of waiting by the elevators here.
What's going on? Why are we here?
We are interviewing the president of Syria, Ahmed al-Sharaa.
This is Susanna George. She's talking with Post Reports producer Alana Gordon. On Monday evening, they and several other journalists from the Post sat down with Ahmed al-Sharaa, the president of Syria. They met with him after his visit with President Trump at the White House.
Why is this such a notable thing right now?
It's the first visit by a Syrian president, and what's interesting about him specifically visiting is, it wasn't too long ago that he was a prisoner in a U.S. detention facility in Iraq when he was a fighter against American forces there.
Ahmed al-Sharaa has long been designated by the U.S. as a terrorist. Then last year, he led the stunning ouster of the authoritarian Assad regime. Now this week, he became the first Syrian head of state to meet with a U.S. president in the White House.
Okay.
From the newsroom of the Washington Post, this is Post Reports. I'm Colby Ickowitz. It's Wednesday, November 12th. Today, from al-Qaeda to the White House, we take you inside our meeting with the new Syrian president. Susanna, hello. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So, Susanna, you actually got to sit down and meet President Ahmed al-Sharaa earlier this week. What was that like? What was he like?
So we arrive in this suite and we all sit around these cream couches and chairs. There's a coffee table in the middle, a chair at the front with the Syrian flag, 2 Syrian flags on either side. There was an interpreter who had, been working with him all day, I think. And then Sharaa enters.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Peter Spiegel, and I am managing editor of the Washington Post. First of all, Mr. President, welcome to Washington.
Yes. So all of you are from the Washington Post.
Yes.
He sits down and we start asking questions.
هو أهم شيء بداية إنشاء العلاقة ما بين سوريا والولايات المتحدة الأمريكية لأنه العلاقة كانت مضطربة خلال 100 سنة الماضية.
The most important objective is starting on building the relationship between Syria and the United States, because in the past 100 years, it wasn't a very good relationship.
He was engaging, direct. He told jokes. He came across very comfortable in the room. And he was wearing a suit and tie. This is what we see him wear when he's out meeting world leaders. It's a very different look from the camouflage fatigues that he was wearing when his forces rolled into Damascus last December.
I want to ask you about Ahmed al-Sharaa specifically, because there's this improbable path that would bring him to Washington, D.C., meeting with the United States president in the White House. Walk me through that trajectory, where he started and how he got to where he is now.
So al-Sharaa comes from an educated family, middle-class family. He was born in Saudi Arabia, but he grew up in Syria. And he describes himself being really influenced by the events in the region. When he was a teenager, he talks about the Palestinian Intifada. This was the uprising against Israeli forces. There was a huge surge in violence in the Palestinian territories during that time. And he also talks about the impact of the Iraq War on him, and the Iraq War following the 2003 invasion of Iraq by U.S. forces. He says that he became very interested in learning how to fight and being involved in that struggle. And so he eventually decided to go into Iraq from Syria and join the insurgency there.
This is the Iraq War after September 11th, 2001.
Yes, the Iraq War that began in 2003.
And so he joins the insurgency fighting against the United States in Iraq. What happens to him when he's there?
He was captured pretty quickly and imprisoned. He spent some time in Abu Ghraib. He spent some time in Taji and in Buqa, all really notorious U.S. prisons in Iraq at the time. And he was held in those prisons for a number of years. And he says that it was actually his time in prison where he really learned about, the insurgency, all the different groups that were operating in Iraq, how they interacted with each other. And he learned a lot about political Islam there as well. He was then released from prison in 2011, and that was right when the Syrian civil war was beginning. So he decided to go back to Syria, to his homeland, and establish an al-Qaeda affiliate there, Jabhat al-Nusra. And what this group was fighting for was for the overthrow of the Assad regime.
For most Americans, when you hear al-Qaeda, you think of the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks. That's the connection. Would he have been labeled a terrorist by U.S. standards?
He was. He was also officially designated a terrorist by the United Nations and the United States. And so was his group, HTS, the group that he eventually formed in Syria. He broke from al-Qaeda eventually after fighting for many years alongside them. And he decided he wanted to form an umbrella group. This was a time when the rebel forces that were against Assad in Syria were heavily divided. And he was trying to kind of gather as many of these rebel groups together and try to unite them against Assad. And that was how HTS was formed.
So how do we get from his group, him being designated a terrorist, to where we found ourselves this week? He's at the White House. He's being welcomed by President Trump. He's meeting with Washington Post journalists. How does he get from there to there?
I mean, the way he ended up as the leader of Syria is that the group that he commanded overthrew the leader of Syria. Before Sharaa forces rolled into Damascus, Syria was ruled by a dictator, Bashar al-Assad, and his father, Hafez al-Assad, before him. And the Assad family rule was highly repressive. Media was heavily censored. People were subjected to extensive surveillance. It was one of these deep cultures of fear where you just never really know who might inform on you. And if you are informed on, if you do run afoul of the security forces, you could very easily be disappeared. There were over 100,000 people estimated to have been disappeared into these extensive secret prison networks that the Assad regime ran. I mean, so this just a very deep culture of fear in that country.
And then Assad is overthrown. What happens after that to Syria?
Well, it was Ahmed al-Sharaa and these fighters that he had formed in Syria. They're the ones who rolled into Damascus and overthrew the Assad regime after all this time.
We have video of citizens filling the streets, celebrating, taking down statues, as you see there, of the Assad family.
And shortly after arriving in the capital, Sharaa spoke from Damascus, from the landmark Umayyad Mosque. He declared Assad's fall a victory for the Islamic nation.
Syrian state television reported that tens of thousands of people detained in the prisons have been freed over the past 10 days.
And shortly after that, in January, he installed himself as president.
When this major shift happens, what were some of the maybe concerns, but also the hopes?
I talked a little bit before about, this culture of fear and the repressive nature of this regime that lasted for decades. So when it kind of fell almost overnight, to the surprise of the entire world, it was this moment of immense hope. But people were also very nervous. It was a lot of change very quickly, and there was a lot of uncertainty, especially in those early days, about what was going to come next. So people were very hopeful, but also wary about, what the new regime would bring. And there were also some serious security concerns. Inside Syria, the Islamic State group is still active in the country. And regionally, people were worried if after Assad, if there was even more instability in Syria, what the impact of that would be.
And you said he installed himself as president. So how should we understand what kind of leader he's going to be?
So Sharaa installed himself as president, and this is all intended to be temporary, to kind of stabilize the country, start rebuilding so that elections can be held in the future. He has appointed a cabinet for himself, and his HTS fighters, those rebel fighters that ousted Assad, they make up the backbone of the country's security forces.
And what will it take for the nation to be stabilized? Like, what are some of the things that Syria is facing right now?
Sharaa's challenges at home in Syria are enormous. I think one of his main priorities is getting funding, investment to rebuild after years of devastating war. There's a real fear that the country could slip back into violence. There have been some really horrific instances of sectarian violence in the country's Druze and Alawite communities. And, some world leaders are calling on Sharaa to do more, that he has to reform the security forces faster in order to protect these vulnerable communities in Syria. And what he says is that he's moving as fast as he can. What he said in the interview.
استقرار سوريا يؤثر على استقرار المنطقة بأكملها، واضطراب سوريا أيضا يؤثر على المنطقة بأكملها كما كان في السابق.
The stability of Syria will impact the entire region, and the instability of Syria as well will impact the region, as the case was in the past.
Syria was a source of instability in the region under Assad, and now that underlines the importance of turning things around. I think that there is a strong desire for him to succeed. The instability in Syria when the country was at war affected, not only countries in the region, but it affected Europe with the migration crisis. It affected the United States with, attacks against U.S. interests. So I think that there's a lot of reasons why U.S. officials, European officials, other officials in the Middle East would like to see Sharaa succeed.
كل العالم يبحث عن استقرار في سوريا، لكن استقرار مرتبط في التنمية الاقتصادية، والتنمية الاقتصادية مرتبط في إزالة العقوبات.
All the world is looking for the stability of Syria, but the stability is linked with the economy, and the economy or economic development is linked with the lifting of sanctions.
I mean, why should people in the United States suddenly be comfortable with lifting sanctions for trusting this person, given his past affiliation with al-Qaeda, his past fighting U.S. troops? What did he say about that?
We asked him about his past as a member of an affiliate of al-Qaeda and how he would respond to concerns that past would maybe make him not an ideal partner for the United States now. Peter Spiegel, the Post's managing editor, specifically asked about this and this idea that the U.S. would lift sanctions on Syria, which is what Sharaa was here in Washington to lobby for.
Can I ask you mentioned the 7 years where you were missing. It does talk a bit about your background, and obviously your relationship with the United States has been complicated over the last 20 years. What would you say to an average American who talks to their congressman and is debating these sanctions and says, why are we lifting sanctions on a man who was a soldier against the United States back a long time ago?
And what he said is that he's not ashamed of his past and that participating in armed struggle is a noble calling.
بداية القتال ليس شيء فيه عيب إذا كان أهدافه نبيلة.
To start with, fighting is not something shameful if it's done for noble objectives.
وخاصة إذا كنت تدافع عن أرضك وعن الناس المظلومين.
Especially if you are defending your own land and the people who are suffering from injustice.
هذا شيء جيد يمدح عليه الإنسان.
I believe this is something good that people should be commended for.
أنا دخلت في حروب كثيرة لكن عمري ما تسببت في قتل إنسان بريء.
I have fought so many wars, but I've never caused the death of an innocent person.
Yeah, and in this part, he really stressed that, while he was a fighter, he wasn't launching these attacks on American soil. But he said that, it was U.S. policies in the region that motivated him to engage in the fight.
And today we have so many Americans who agree with us that some of these policies were mistaken, and they caused so many wars that were pointless.
فأنا لم أقاتل في الولايات المتحدة، أنا قاتلت على أراضي في المنطقة عندنا.
So I didn't fight on U.S. soil. I fought in our region.
After the break, we'll hear more from the Syrian president and what his leadership means for the relationship between the U.S. and Syria. We'll be right back. So, Susanna, why was he in Washington? What was he hoping to achieve here?
Sharaa has spent a lot of his first year in power, traveling all over the world, meeting with world leaders. And one of the reasons that he's doing that is because under Assad, Syria was incredibly isolated. The country had all these sanctions imposed on it. It was a pariah state, and his only two real backers toward the end of his rule were Iran and Russia, two countries that have been in conflict with the United States. Now that Sharaa is in charge, in order for him to rebuild the country after war, a devastating war, he's got to get these sanctions removed. And so he was in D.C. to largely push for that.
Interesting. So he was asking Trump basically to lift these sanctions that still exist.
A lot of the sanctions have been temporarily lifted, but what he was looking for was a permanent lifting of the sanctions. This would require congressional approval, and that's what he was asking Trump for. The first thing that we asked him about after he sat down was about his efforts to get these sanctions removed and his conversations with members of Congress and President Trump. And so were you able to make progress asking for those sanctions to be lifted?
هل استطعتم إحراز تقدم بطلبكم برفع هذه العقوبات؟
أعتقد النقاش واستمر لعدة أشهر ونحن وصلنا إلى نتائج جيدة، لكن من نهاية الموضوع القرار عندهم يبقى.
This discussion has been going on for months now, and I believe that we reached good results, but we are still waiting for the final decision.
الحالة الطبيعية إنه يجب أن ترفع العقوبات بشكل كامل.
The natural or the normal thing is for the sanctions to be lifted.
He said that talks were going well, that he didn't get the definitive answers that he was looking for, but he felt like he has the support of the Trump administration. One of his other big asks.
أكيد في العالم الآن الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية الوحيدة القادرة على ضبط السلوك الإسرائيلي.
I believe in the world, the United States is the only country that can put the Israeli conduct under check.
Was to try to get the U.S. president to agree to pressure Israel to stop launching attacks on Syrian territory and to eventually agree to withdraw from Syrian territory. Basically, to try to get Trump's support for terms to a security agreement with Israel that would be favorable to Syria.
أيضا وجدنا رئيس ترامب دعم لوجهة نظر سوريا.
And today we found that Mr. Trump supports our perspective as well.
Right now, these attacks that Israel is launching on Syrian territory are the most significant threat to Syria's sovereignty at the moment. And as Sharaa is trying to consolidate his control, trying to rebuild the country from devastating war, he's got to get these to stop. And he's hoping that Trump can help him do that. When we asked if he thought a security agreement with Israel could come soon, he kind of dodged the question.
So there is an Iraqi proverb that I, and as an interpreter, might not understand, and you will not understand. It doesn't translate.
الخلاصة أنه أحيانا يعني لا تقول أنك اصطدت السمكة حتى تصبح في يدك يعني.
So it's the meaning of that proverb is that you can't say that you have a fish until you actually catch the fish.
So you and the other Post journalists, you met with al-Sharaa after his meeting with Trump. What do we actually know about how that meeting went?
Well, the meeting at the White House was closed press, so we didn't get to see Trump and Sharaa interact. But from the official photos we saw, it looked very warm. The president spoke about the meeting afterwards. He had positive things to say about Sharaa.
He's a very strong leader. He comes from a very tough place, and he's a tough guy. I liked him. I get along with him. The new president of Syria. And we'll do everything we can to make Syria successful because that's part of the Middle East.
It seems like Trump and Sharaa get along.
Had they met before?
They had met in Saudi Arabia in May.
Okay.
That was when Trump first agreed to lift sanctions on Syria. It was a really big moment in the Arab world. And he met Sharaa shortly after making that announcement.
So I was wondering, when you guys spoke with him, did you ask him about some of the, the big questions that I think about when it comes to Syria and Syria's future, like the human rights concerns and the potential for more sectarian violence?
Yeah, we asked him about concerns around sectarian violence and the rights of minorities in Syria. And to that, he essentially said that it takes a long time for a country to recover from war and that, it's been less than a year since Assad's fall and country needs more time to fully stabilize.
Susanna, with the fall of Assad and the release of prisoners who'd gone missing, a lot of people were hopeful about Washington Post reporter Austin Tice, who's now been missing in Syria since 2012. Did we ask him about this? And for those who don't know, remind us about Tice's situation.
Austin Tice was a freelance writer with the Washington Post. He was covering Syria's civil war when he was abducted around August of 2012. And since then, numerous U.S. officials have said the search for Tice has yielded very little credible, verifiable information, and he remains missing and unaccounted for.
And so then what did Sharaa say about the search for Tice, the hopes of finding Tice?
What he said is that he met with Austin Tice's mother when she came to Damascus, and he actually introduced her to his own mother, who had been through a similar ordeal.
فأتيت بوالدتي حتى تحكي لها القصة وأنا في القصر كنت.
So while in the palace, in the presidential palace, I had the mother of Tice meet with my mother. So my mother tell the mother of Tice my story.
ففي وقت أنا ذكرت لها إنه أنا أشعر بها.
Sharaa, at one point, his mother didn't know if he was alive or dead for years, 7 years, he said.
ففي وقت أنا ذكرت لها إنه أنا أشعر بها.
So at the time, I told her that I feel her.
And it was a really powerful moment in the interview.
I guess that's what he was saying, is that there's still hope?
He didn't directly answer that part of the question.
Okay. So what are your biggest takeaways on what he views as Syria's future?
I think a lot, the reason that he's here in Washington, D.C., for a visit lasting, I think it was longer than 2 days that he spent in Washington, meeting with members of the Syrian American community, members of Congress, the president. This shows you just how important he sees the Syrian-U.S. relationship right now, how critical it is to have the United States and the Trump administration on his side. And I think that's also a big reason why he decided to sit down with us. He's at a moment where he really needs to get his message out. And it's critical for him for security reasons with dealing with Israel. And it's also critical for the plan that he has to try to rebuild Syria after years of war and decades of dictator rule.
So how did this time spent with him, how did the conversation end?
So toward the end of the conversation, I really wanted to ask him about this video that had gotten a lot of attention during his visit, where he was playing basketball with some of the top U.S. generals in the American military. I have one last question. It's a fun one. It's about the video of you playing basketball. I think when some people see these videos, they find them surreal, like surprising, that they're kind of these symbols of this rise that you've had from prison to, the White House. And I'm just wondering, what is your impression of, you were on stage with David Petraeus just a month or two ago. What's your impression from meeting all of these people who were on the opposite side of a very brutal war from you? And he told us that he reflected on it. He talked about the importance of kind of introducing different sides of yourself to people at different times.
فرصة جيدة يتعرفوا علينا بشكل جيد.
So it's a good opportunity to introduce ourselves to you and to learn about us.
أحيانا السياسة والحرب تحتاج إلى رسائل فيها مودة ومحبة بين الناس.
Sometimes politics and war require messages that send messages of love and friendliness to the people.
Susanna, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Susanna George is a correspondent on the Post's international desk. He likes basketball.
He does. That's what he said.
Does he have a favorite team?
He has a favorite player.
Oh, who's that?
I'll give you one guess.
Like playing now
time.
or all time?
Of all time.
Michael Jordan.
Yes.
أنا كنت قديما مشجعين مايكل جوردن.
I used to be a fan of Michael Jordan
صغير يعني.
when I was young.
That's it for Post Reports. Thanks for listening. If you love the show, help other people discover it by leaving a rating on Spotify or a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Today's show was produced by Alana Gordon with help from Sabby Robinson. It was mixed by Sean Carter and edited by Rena Flores. I'm Colby Ekowitz. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from the Washington Post.